Innocence shattered. Childhood lost. For most, childhood is a time of joy and discovery. But for a few, it is the beginning of something much darker. These children committed crimes that shocked the world and forever changed how we view innocence. In 1993, these two 10-year-old boys abducted and killed 2-year-old James Bulger in Liverpool, England. The crime involved brutal violence and shook the nation, given the killer's young age. On February 12, 1993, in Merseyside, two 10-year-old boys, Robert Thompson and John Venables, abducted, tortured, and murdered 2-year-old James Bulger. They led him away from the New Strand shopping center in Bootle after his mother briefly lost sight of him. Bulger's mutilated body was discovered 2 days later on a railway line, 2.5 miles away in Walton, Liverpool. Thompson and Venables were charged with abduction and murder on February 20, 1993, and were found guilty on November 24, making them the youngest convicted murderers in modern British history. They received indefinite detention at Her Majesty's pleasure and remained in custody until the parole board recommended their release on a lifelong license in June 2001, when they turned 18. Venables was imprisoned again in 2010 for breaching his parole conditions, released on parole in 2013, and then returned to prison in November 2017 for possessing child sexual abuse images. As of 2023, he remained in prison after several appeals for parole were denied. The case has sparked significant debate over the handling of young offenders in terms of sentencing and rehabilitation. Thompson and Venables led 2-year-old James Bulger to the Leeds and Liverpool Canal, about a quarter of a mile from the New Strand shopping center, where they dropped him on his head, causing facial injuries. Witnesses reported that Bulger was crying while the boys joked about pushing him into the canal. They walked over 2.5 miles across Liverpool, seen by around 38 people, most of whom did not intervene. When confronted, they claimed Bulger was their brother or lost, and even entered a pet shop before being ejected. Eventually, they reached a railway line near Walton Park Cemetery, hesitating near a police station. They tortured Bulger by throwing blue paint in his eye, kicking and stamping on him, and throwing bricks and stones at him. They placed batteries in his mouth and may have attempted to insert them elsewhere. The boys then dropped a 10 kilograms railway fishplate on Bulger's head, resulting in 10 skull fractures among a total of 42 injuries. They laid Bulger on the tracks and weighted his head down with rubble, intending for a train to strike him and make his death appear accidental. After they left, his body was cut in half by a train, and it was discovered by children 2 days later. A forensic pathologist confirmed that Bulger had died before being hit by the train. Police suspected that Robert Thompson and John Venables had sexually assaulted James Bulger, as he was found without his shoes, socks, trousers, and underpants. A pathologist's report indicated that Bulger's foreskin had been forcibly retracted. When questioned about this during the investigation, both boys were hesitant to provide details. After Venables was released on parole, his psychiatrist noted that he did not acknowledge any sexual aspect of the crime. Investigators quickly obtained low-resolution CCTV footage of Bulger's abduction by the two boys. The site where Bulger's body was discovered became a memorial, with hundreds of flowers left by mourners. One boy who was initially questioned had to leave the city due to threats from vigilantes. The case took a significant turn when a woman recognized Venables from enhanced images on national television, recalling that she had seen him and Thompson playing truant that day. This led to their arrest. The youth of the suspects, Robert Thompson and John Venables, shocked the investigating officers, led by Detective Superintendent Albert Kirby of Merseyside Police. Initial reports referred to Bulger being seen with two youths, leading to assumptions that the killers were older teenagers. However, forensic evidence soon linked the boys to the crime. Both had blue paint on their clothing that matched paint found on Bulger's body, and DNA testing confirmed blood on Thompson's shoe belonged to Bulger. Additionally, bruising on Bulger's cheek was consistent with Thompson's shoe, and the paint mark on Venables' shoe suggested he had kicked Bulger with force. On February 20, 1993, both boys were charged with Bulger's murder and appeared at South Sefton Youth Court on February 22, where they were remanded in custody, pending trial. Throughout the legal proceedings, the boys were identified in the media as Child A. Thompson and Child B. Venables. They were held in secure units until their eventual sentencing at Her Majesty's pleasure. In 1968, 10-year-old Mary Bell strangled two boys, ages 3 and 4, in Newcastle, England. She displayed disturbing behavior, showing no remorse after the killings. Mary Flora Bell, born May 26, 1957, is an English woman who, as a child, killed two young boys in Scotswood, a suburb of Newcastle upon Tyne, in 1968. Bell committed her first murder at the age of 10. In both cases, she told her victims that they had a sore throat, offering to massage it before strangling them. In December 1968, Bell was found guilty of manslaughter for both murders during a trial at Newcastle Assizes when she was just 11 years old. The court ruled that her actions were carried out under diminished responsibility. She became Britain's youngest female killer and was diagnosed with a psychopathic personality disorder before the trial. Her alleged accomplice, 13-year-old Norma Joyce Bell, no relation, was acquitted of all charges. Mary Bell was released from custody in 1980 at age 23. A lifelong court order was granted to protect her anonymity, which has since been extended to safeguard the identities of her daughter and granddaughter. She has lived under various pseudonyms ever since. On May 25, 1968, the day before her 11th birthday, Mary Bell lured 4-year-old Martin Brown into an abandoned house in Scotswood, a poor neighborhood in Newcastle. Inside, she strangled the boy to death. His body was discovered by local boys later that day. Initially, his death was ruled as an accident, as there were no visible signs of violence on his body. However, Mary later confessed to killing Martin and indicated that she found pleasure in watching him die. Shortly after the murder, Mary, along with her friend Norma Bell, no relation, began engaging in strange behavior. They broke into a nursery school and left notes taking responsibility for Martin's death, which were initially dismissed as a prank. Mary also visited Martin's family after the murder, asking to see him and claiming to know where he was. Her actions raised suspicion, but there was no concrete evidence against her at the time. Just 2 months after the first murder, on July 31, 1968, Mary Bell struck again. This time, she and Norma lured 3-year-old Brian Howe to a wasteland near their homes. Mary strangled Brian to death and, in a disturbing act of sadism, mutilated his body with scissors, cutting his hair and scratching his legs and genitals. The police quickly launched an investigation, and this time they took the case more seriously due to the mutilation of Brian's body, which suggested the killer had a disturbed mind. Mary Bell's behavior following Brian's murder aroused further suspicion. She seemed to take an interest in the investigation and even asked detectives if they thought the killer had been a child. Norma eventually confessed to witnessing the murders, and both girls were arrested. During their trial in December 1968, Norma was acquitted of all charges, as she was seen as an unwilling accomplice manipulated by Mary. Mary, on the other hand, was found guilty of manslaughter rather than murder due to diminished responsibility. The jury accepted that she suffered from a psychopathic personality disorder, which impaired her understanding of right and wrong. She was sentenced to be detained at Her Majesty's pleasure, a sentence without a fixed term, meaning she could be released when it was deemed safe to do so. Mary Bell spent 12 years in various institutions, including a high-security prison, and was released in 1980 at the age of 23. After her release, she was given a new identity to protect her privacy and start a new life. She had a daughter in 1984 who did not know of her mother's past until reporters tracked them down in 1998, the year Bell's daughter turned 14. In a controversial legal decision, Mary Bell was granted lifelong anonymity, along with her daughter, under a court order referred to as a Mary Bell Order, to prevent her from being harassed by the media or public. The case of Mary Bell continues to be a source of fascination and horror. It raises questions about childhood violence, the impact of abusive environments, and the justice system's handling of young offenders. Mary Bell's story has been the subject of numerous books and documentaries, including Gita Sarani's Cries Unheard, in which Bell gave her account of her troubled childhood and the murders she committed. The Mary Bell case remains one of the most notorious cases of child murder in modern history, with the complexities of her early life and the horrific nature of her crimes continuing to haunt public memory. Graham Frederick Young, known as the teacup poisoner, was a British man who gained notoriety for his fascination with poisons and his involvement in several murders. Born on September 7, 1947, in Neasden, London, Young became interested in toxicology at a very young age, leading to a deadly obsession that would claim the lives of multiple victims. From a young age, Young developed an unusual fascination with poisons, particularly toxic chemicals, and their effects on the human body. By age 13, he was reading extensively about poisons and experimenting with chemicals at home. His behavior began to worry his family, but no one could have predicted the dark turn it would take. In 1961, at just 14 years old, Young began poisoning members of his family. His stepmother, Molly, became ill and eventually died from what was initially thought to be natural causes, though it was later confirmed that she had been poisoned with thallium. His father and sister also suffered from mysterious bouts of illness due to his experiments. Suspicious of his son's growing obsession with chemicals, Young's father found poison-related materials in his room and alerted the authorities. In 1962, Young was arrested and confessed to poisoning his family. He was convicted of attempted murder and sent to Broadmoor Hospital, a high-security psychiatric institution, at the age of 15. During his time in Broadmoor, Young continued to study chemistry and toxicology, fueling his interest in poisons even further. He was released in 1971 after nearly a decade of imprisonment, with authorities believing he had been rehabilitated. After his release, Young quickly resumed his poisonous activities. He took a job as a storekeeper at a photographic supply company in Bovingdon, where he began poisoning his co-workers, lacing their tea and food with thallium and other toxic substances. Several employees fell ill, and two of them, Fred Biggs and Bob Eggle, died as a result of the poisoning. The mysterious illnesses at the company raised suspicions, and Young's background in toxicology and previous conviction led the police to investigate him. In 1971, police searched Young's room and found extensive notes detailing his poisonings, along with quantities of toxic substances. He was arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder and poisoning. Young's trial began in June 1972, where he was charged with 2 counts of murder, 2 counts of attempted murder, and 2 counts of administering poison. His detailed diaries, in which he meticulously recorded the effects of the poisons on his victims, became a key piece of evidence in the case. He was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. The press dubbed him the teacup poisoner because of his method of delivering poisons through tea, a common beverage at his workplace. Graham Young died in prison on August 1, 1990, at the age of 42, from a heart attack. His legacy remains one of the most chilling cases of a young man driven by an obsessive curiosity about poisons, leading him to commit multiple murders without remorse. Young's story is a disturbing example of how an early fascination with something as lethal as toxicology, combined with psychological instability, can spiral into a deadly obsession. Amarjit Sada, an 8-year-old boy from Bihar, India, gained international notoriety in 2007 for being one of the youngest serial killers ever reported. Born into a poor family in the village of Mushahar, Amarjit's case is especially disturbing due to both his age and the brutality of his actions, which led to the deaths of 3 children, all of whom were part of his extended family and local community. Amarjit Sada's killing spree is believed to have begun in 2006 when he was just 7 years old. His first 2 victims were reportedly family members, a 6-month-old cousin and his own 8-month-old sister. The deaths were initially kept secret within the family due to their extreme poverty and fear of legal repercussions. However, it was the murder of his 3rd victim, a 6-month-old girl from the village, that finally led to his arrest. In 2007, Amarjit abducted the infant, Khushbu, from a local school where she had been left sleeping by her mother. He took the baby into a field and proceeded to beat her to death using a brick. When the baby was reported missing, villagers organized a search party, and Amarjit calmly confessed to the murder, leading them to the site where he had left the body. When the police were called to investigate, Amarjit Sada confessed to all 3 murders with chilling ease. He reportedly showed no remorse and even smiled while recounting the details of his actions. According to local reports, he admitted to killing his sister and cousin in the same way as his final victim by using blunt force to their heads with bricks or stones. Police were shocked not only by the nature of the crimes, but also by how young the perpetrator was. Amarjit was immediately taken into custody, but under Indian law, which states that children under the age of 18 cannot be sentenced to death or life imprisonment, his case was handled under juvenile justice protocols. Amarjit Sada was subjected to psychological evaluations to understand what drove him to commit such heinous acts at such a young age. Psychologists suggested that he might have suffered from a severe conduct disorder or a psychopathic condition, which made him unable to understand the moral implications of his actions. However, due to the lack of proper mental health care infrastructure in the region, there is little documentation of any formal diagnosis or long-term care for him. Because of his age, Amarjit Sada could not be tried as an adult. Under India's juvenile justice system, children under the age of 18 cannot be sentenced to adult prisons or serve life sentences. Amarjit was sent to a juvenile home, where he would be held until he turned 18. Information about his life after incarceration is scarce, as juvenile offenders in India are granted anonymity to protect their identity and allow for rehabilitation. Amarjit's case shocked both the local community and the world, as instances of such young children committing multiple murders are exceedingly rare. His lack of remorse and the ease with which he carried out the killings left many questions about the influences and circumstances that led to his behavior. Some speculated that the extreme poverty and lack of social support in his environment may have contributed to his emotional detachment and violent tendencies. Amarjit Sada's case remains one of the most chilling and tragic examples of child-on-child violence. It highlights the complexities of juvenile crime, especially when it involves such extreme cases of violence at a very young age. While the case is unique, it raises important questions about the psychological care and legal treatment of young offenders in countries with limited resources for mental health and child welfare. Jordan Brown's case is one of the most notorious examples of juvenile crime in the United States, largely due to his young age and the severity of the crime he was accused of committing. In 2009, at just 11 years old, Jordan was charged with the murder of his father's pregnant fiancée, Kenzie Marie Houck, and her unborn child. The case raised intense debates about the prosecution of children in the adult justice system and the handling of young offenders. On the morning of February 20, 2009, in Wampum, Pennsylvania, Kenzie Houck, 26, was found dead in her bed from a close-range shotgun wound to the back of her head. Houck was 8 months pregnant, and the murder resulted in the death of her unborn son, who was to be named Christopher. Jordan, who lived in the house with his father, Chris Brown, and Houck's 2 daughters from a previous relationship, was the last person to see Houck alive. The murder weapon was found to be a youth-sized 20-gauge shotgun, a gift Jordan had received for hunting. Shortly after the discovery of Houck's body, investigators arrested Jordan Brown on suspicion of her murder. The prosecution argued that Jordan, out of jealousy or resentment, killed Houck while she slept. They believe that Jordan had used the shotgun, shot Houck in the back of the head, and then calmly boarded the school bus to go to class as if nothing had happened. One of Houck's daughters, 7-year-old Janessa, claimed to have heard a loud bang before going to the bus and said that Jordan had acted unusually that morning. Investigators found the shotgun in Jordan's room with a recently discharged shell casing nearby. The prosecution's theory was that Jordan had fired the shot and then discarded the shell casing before leaving for school. They argued that Houck's pending marriage to Jordan's father and the arrival of a new baby may have led Jordan to feel threatened or upset. Jordan Brown and his defense team maintained his innocence from the beginning. His lawyers argued that there was no physical evidence directly linking Jordan to the crime. There were no fingerprints, no gunshot residue on his hands, and no blood on his clothes. They claimed that the investigation was flawed and rushed, and that alternative suspects, including Houck's ex-boyfriend, who had a history of threatening her, were not adequately considered. Jordan's defense also criticized the idea that an 11-year-old could carry out such a calculated crime and then behave normally afterward. The case became highly controversial because of the prosecution's decision to try Jordan Brown as an adult, despite his age. In Pennsylvania, juveniles accused of murder are automatically charged as adults unless their defense can prove they should be tried as juveniles. If convicted as an adult, Jordan faced life in prison without parole, the mandatory sentence for first-degree murder in Pennsylvania. The case went through a lengthy series of legal battles, including appeals over whether Jordan should be tried as a juvenile or an adult. His defense team argued that, at 11 years old, Jordan lacked the maturity to fully understand the crime, and that he should not face adult penalties. In 2012, after 3 years of legal wrangling, the Pennsylvania Superior Court ruled that Jordan should be tried as a juvenile. The decision to move the case to juvenile court meant that, if convicted, Jordan would be released at age 21. In 2016, after multiple hearings and appeals, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court overturned Jordan Brown's conviction. The court ruled that the evidence against him was insufficient to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he had committed the crime. Jordan, who had spent 7 years in a juvenile detention facility, was released from custody, and his record was expunged. The case remains controversial, with many still divided over whether Jordan was guilty or innocent. Some believe that the prosecution failed to provide enough solid evidence, while others think the decision to try an 11-year-old as an adult was unjust. Jordan Brown's case raised important questions about the treatment of juveniles in the criminal justice system, particularly those accused of serious crimes like murder. It highlighted the potential dangers of automatically transferring juvenile cases to adult court, as well as the challenges of balancing justice with rehabilitation for young offenders. The case drew national and international attention, sparking debates about whether children as young as Jordan should be held fully accountable for crimes in the same way as adults. Jordan Brown, who has since been released, has attempted to live a private life after his exoneration. Jordan Brown's story remains one of the most complex and controversial cases involving a child accused of murder. His case underscores the ongoing debate about how the legal system should handle young offenders, particularly when they face the possibility of life-altering penalties, such as life in prison. Nicknamed El Petiso Orejudo, the big-eared midget, Godino was an Argentine serial killer active between 1906 and 1912. By age 16, he had killed 4 children, attempted to murder 7 others, and set multiple fires. From a young age, Cayetano Santos Godino displayed disturbing tendencies, such as killing small animals like cats and birds and showing a fascination with fire. His aggressive behavior and disinterest in school led to frequent changes in schools. In 1904, at the age of 7, Cayetano assaulted a 2-year-old boy, Miguel Di Pauli, beating him and throwing him into a ditch. A nearby official saw the incident and took both children to the police station, where their mothers later picked them up. In 1905, Cayetano attacked another child from his neighborhood, Ana Neri, hitting her with a stone. Though a police officer intervened, Cayetano was released because of his young age. In 1906, he committed his first murder, though it went unnoticed at the time. Years later, Cayetano confessed to killing 3-year-old Maria Rosa Face. He recounted luring her to a wasteland on Rio de Janeiro Street, attempting to strangle her, and then burying her alive under a pile of cans. When authorities investigated after his confession, they found a 2-story house had since been built on the site. However, a missing persons report for a 3-year-old girl named Maria Rosa Face, filed on March 29, 1906, was found in police records, but her body was never recovered. On January 17, 1912, Cayetano set fire to a warehouse on Corrine Street. When questioned by police, he stated, "I like to see firemen working. It's fun to watch them fall into the fire." Days later, on January 26, 1912, 13-year-old Arturo Larona was found dead in an abandoned house. About 6 weeks later, on March 7, 1912, Cayetano set the dress of 5-year-old Reina Vainikoff on fire. She succumbed to her injuries a few days later. In late September 1912, he set fire to a railway station, though the fire was quickly extinguished. On November 8, 1912, Cayetano attempted to strangle 8-year-old Roberto Russo, but was arrested and charged with attempted murder. He was released pending trial. A week later, on November 16, 1912, he attacked 3-year-old Carmen Guitoni, inflicting minor injuries before a police officer intervened, causing Cayetano to flee. On November 20, 1912, he kidnapped 2-year-old Carolina Neoliner, but her cries attracted a neighbor who rescued her. Later that month, he set fire to 2 large sheds, though these fires were also extinguished. On December 3, 1912, Cayetano lured 3-year-old Gesualdo Giordano with the promise of sweets and took him to an isolated country house. After attempting to strangle the boy with his belt, he tied his hands and feet, beat him, and considered driving a nail into his head. After briefly leaving to find a nail, he encountered Giordano's father and lied about the boy's whereabouts. Cayetano returned to the house, hammered the nail into the boy's skull, and hid the body. The boy's father discovered the body shortly afterward. That evening, Cayetano attended the wake, touching the spot where he had driven the nail into Giordano's head. He was arrested early the next morning on December 4, 1912, and confessed to his crimes. On January 4, 1913, Cayetano was sent to a reformatory, where he attempted to kill other inmates. Medical evaluations deemed him insane, prompting the judge to dismiss his case and order him to remain in the reformatory. On November 12, 1915, an appeal was granted, leading to his transfer to a prison on November 20. On March 28, 1923, Cayetano was moved to Ushuaia Penitentiary. In 1933, he spent time in the hospital after being beaten by fellow inmates, which occurred after he killed 2 of their pet cats. From 1935 onward, Cayetano frequently fell ill and had no visitors. He died on November 15, 1944, under suspicious circumstances, with speculation suggesting his death resulted from internal bleeding caused by a gastric condition. When the prison was demolished, his remains were curiously missing, and to this day, his body has not been found. Lionel Alexander Tate, born January 30, 1987, is notable for being the youngest American citizen to receive a life sentence without the possibility of parole, although this sentence was later overturned. In January 2001, at the age of 13, he was convicted of first-degree murder for the 1999 beating death of 6-year-old Tiffany Unick in Broward County, Florida, which occurred while he was imitating professional wrestling moves. On July 28, 1999, Lionel Tate was left alone with his cousin, 6-year-old Tiffany Unick, while she was being babysat by Tate's mother, Kathleen Grossa Tate. The children were downstairs watching WWF SmackDown when Tate's mother called for them to be quiet. Approximately 45 minutes later, Tate went upstairs to inform his mother that Tiffany was not breathing. Tiffany had severe bruising on her legs, feet, and neck, with the level of force indicated by the bruises comparable to that of being hit by a speeding car. She also suffered from a fractured skull, a lacerated liver, a fractured rib, and swelling in her brain. The prosecution described her injuries as similar to those from a fall from a 3-story building. In sentencing Tate to life imprisonment, Judge Joel T. Lazarus of the Broward County Circuit Court remarked that the acts of Lionel Tate were not the playful acts of a child. They were cold, callous, and indescribably cruel. Dwayne Johnson, known as The Rock, was subpoenaed during the trial on March 3, 2000. Under Florida law, the jury was required to convict Lionel Tate of first-degree murder even if they did not believe he intended to kill or injure anyone. The statute stipulated that all that was necessary for conviction was that Tate knowingly abused another child, leading to their death. This falls under the felony murder rule, which was outlined by Judge Joel T. Lazarus during sentencing. As a result, Tate received a life sentence without the prosecution needing to demonstrate that he intended to harm, understood that his actions could cause harm, or that a typical child his age would recognize the potential for injury. Critics, including various groups who submitted an amicus brief with Tate's appeal, argue that convicting preteen children of first-degree murder without establishing any intent to cause harm, especially in relation to serious injury or death, is inappropriate and unjust. The sentence sparked controversy because Tate was just 12 years old at the time of the murder, while his victim was only 6. This made him the youngest individual in modern U.S. history to receive a life imprisonment sentence, leading to widespread criticism regarding how juvenile offenders are treated within Florida's justice system. Following the conviction, the prosecution publicly supported Tate's request for a lighter sentence and even offered assistance with his appeal. The trial judge condemned this move, arguing that it undermined the integrity of the adversarial legal system and stating that if the prosecution believed life imprisonment was inappropriate, they should not have pursued murder charges in the first place. In January 2004, a state appeals court reversed his conviction, citing the lack of a mental competency evaluation prior to the trial. This ruling allowed Tate to accept the plea deal he had previously rejected, resulting in his release on 1 year of house arrest followed by 10 years of probation. On May 23, 2005, Tate faced charges of armed burglary, battery, armed robbery, and probation violation, according to the Broward County Sheriff's Office. He threatened Domino's pizza delivery driver Walter Ernest Gallardo with a handgun after ordering pizzas, prompting Gallardo to drop the pizzas and flee. Tate then returned to the apartment where he assaulted the resident who attempted to prevent him from entering. Gallardo called 911 upon reaching the Domino's store and later identified Tate to law enforcement, although no weapon was found. On March 1, 2006, Tate agreed to a plea bargain and was set to be sentenced to 30 years in prison during a hearing scheduled for April 2006. He acknowledged that he violated his probation by possessing a firearm during the robbery, but refused to disclose where he obtained or disposed of the gun. Tate was permitted to withdraw his guilty plea for robbery, but was ultimately sentenced to 30 years on May 18, 2006, for violating his probation. On October 24, 2007, Florida's 4th District Court of Appeal upheld this sentence. On February 19, 2008, Tate pled no contest to the robbery charge and received a 10-year sentence, which will run concurrently with his 30-year sentence for the probation violation. He is currently incarcerated at the Hamilton Correctional Institution Annex. In 2011, Christian was charged with killing his 2-year-old brother in Jacksonville, Florida, by slamming him into a bookshelf. His case drew attention to the complicated legal treatment of children charged with violent crimes. Christian Fernandez is a notable case in the realm of juvenile crime in the United States. In 2011, at the age of 12, he was charged with the murder of his 2-year-old half-brother, David. The tragic events unfolded on March 12, 2011, in Jacksonville, Florida, when Christian was left in charge of David while their mother was away. Christian reportedly became frustrated with David, who was playing with toys and getting in the way. In an act of aggression, he is alleged to have caused severe injuries to the toddler. When David was found unresponsive, he had sustained significant head trauma, and despite efforts to revive him, he died shortly after being taken to the hospital. The authorities later determined that the injuries were consistent with abuse. After David's death, Christian was taken into custody. The police investigation revealed a troubling background for Christian, including allegations of abuse within the family and a history of behavioral issues. Christian was charged with first-degree murder, and the case drew attention due to his young age and the severity of the crime. Christian's case raised questions about how to treat juvenile offenders in the legal system. In 2012, he pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of manslaughter. The court ruled that he would be sentenced as a juvenile, which typically means that he would not face the same consequences as an adult. Christian was sentenced to 15 years in a juvenile facility, with the possibility of parole. The case sparked discussions about the circumstances that lead children to commit violent acts and the impact of their environments on their behavior. Christian's story is often cited in debates about juvenile justice reform and the treatment of young offenders. They were just children, yet their crimes were monstrous. Are these stories the result of pure evil, or could these tragedies have been prevented?